What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of the podcast. In this episode, we are going to look at a strategy that you need to be careful of, okay, after an injury. And I talked about this recently on a podcast that I've done, but in this one I want to just go into a bit more detail on a different way that you can approach it, okay? So, to dive right into it, we need to think about this a couple of ways. Now, I was speaking to a client recently who had been dealing with significant pain down one leg, and it was after an injury. We were trying to put in place strategies so that she could take it down. Now, on the movement analysis, we could see that she was offloading to one side, and she'd subconsciously taken all of the weight off her right leg and shifted it to the opposite side. Now she was in a place where she was weighting it like 70% on one leg and 30% on the affected leg. And it's a really important issue to consider when you're looking at recovering from an injury or an issue, because it can build up. Now, I'm not talking about what you'll often hear with this misalignment or malalignment or your hips are offline. I'm not talking about that. I'm actually talking about something slightly different. I'm talking about what happens in the body naturally when you stop using a certain part of it. What happens is it's going to start to protect and mind the area. And you need to watch how it restricts movement, tightens the muscles, and causes pain anytime you go thereafter. So it's funny, it's kind of like a bit of a catch-22. You stop using it because of the pain, and then you suffer with more pain because the area has so little confidence in itself that it doesn't want you to load it at all. So as the sensitivity increases, this injury or issue continues to build. And then that causes the area to decondition, and the cycle just kicks off again. Now the cycle will continue until you do something about it. It's going to stay continuing. It's going to get worse. And this podcast hopefully will help you to notice that pattern so you can start to break it. Now what actually sets that pattern off is a completely different question. Now we need to look at it in more detail. Why would we offload due to pain? Partly it's because there's a fear there of pain. The pain is something to be avoided. That all pain is a bad pain. And this comes back to our knowledge of the injury and our past experience with injury. If in the past you've had bad experiences, you've had the same injury over and over again, you are more likely to deal with an issue like this. And it's a habit, it's a belief, and it's a behavior that you need to go in and you need to work on if you want to change it. Without going after it, you're going to be destined to run into the same obstacles over and over again. So if you've been told in the past to rest and to don't do anything that aggravates it, you will more than likely have some of these beliefs around pain, and around pain being always a bad thing. So I made the comparison during the week. The reason that rugby players and combat sport athletes could be considered, let's say, tough is not just because they were born with it. Okay, it's more to do with a low sensitivity to minor change. So when you're boxing, or when you're playing rugby, or anyone here who's playing a contact sport, you'll notice that the first time that you go out and you get tackled or you get hit in the face is generally the worst. And then after that, it becomes a bit less of an annoyance. So it's like the first fall, the first punch in boxing, the first hit in football or in rugby or in whatever sport you're playing. Jiu-jitsu, when you're wearing the gis, when someone rubs up against you at the start, it's very uncomfortable. And it's generally, as I said, it's the worst of the training unless you pick up a more significant injury after. But then as your sensitivity starts to decrease, you become less aware of it. It's like when you're out running and it's a cold, wet, windy night. At the start, it's annoying, but then as you go through it, you start to kind of get on with it. And as inconsiderate as this sounds, sometimes being the key word, taking this approach to pain can help. Not always, but sometimes in the right context when you understand what's going on. What we need to have is we need to kind of have an understanding of when to lean into it. And we need to have that first time that we lean into this, not with hesitancy or with fear, more with a curiosity. And then more of an understanding that we are in control of it. So we can lean into it and we can pull back. We don't have to see it out. If it gets worse, we pull off it. And honestly, just by having this perception, or just by approaching it this way, you can find that you make a big difference very quickly. Okay? Because what will happen is that, in a general sense, when you have the injury there, or the issue there, you're going to want to touch off it and figure out, where I talked about before, is this idea of your zone of comfort and your zone of discomfort. And if you have an acute injury, what will happen is you can often repeat the same pain over and over again. And I always use this analogy with clients, is if you pull a hamstring, every single time that you extend that hamstring at the same range, at the start it's going to be tight and sore, but at the same range there's going to be a point that it's going to give you a very similar level of pain. But when you're dealing with a chronic issue, because you know that it's in the nervous system more, it's a sensitivity that's kind of guarding it all of the time, and it being overprotective, you can touch off it and the range can improve dramatically just after 6 or 7 reps. Because this is what we're always trying to differentiate between, is like, when is it an acute injury? When is it a chronic injury? When is it a sensitivity? When do we have muscle or tissue damage? Okay. And when you start to lead with curiosity, where you're just very hesitant, or you're very curious going into the position and coming out of it, that's when you can see that, okay, right, that's a bad one. This is a good one. This has been overprotective. I'm going to need to work on this position. It's weak or deconditioned. And that's how you start to understand and regain control of it. Because the fear is there because of the lack of control and lack of understanding what's going on. So as you can expand your knowledge, as you can kind of expand your range of comfort, the fear decreases because you have more evidence supporting you that, okay, this isn't as severe of an injury as I initially thought it was. So what we can do is we can lean into it and we can pull back. And as I said, you don't need to see it out. If it gets really bad, you just stop and you can go relaxing. And honestly, in a lot of cases, this is the first step to recovery. It's about understanding your injury. And what I use often is the analogy of a sprained ankle. When you look at the size of the ligament that's often sprained with an ankle, the ATFL ligament, it's tiny. It's about the size, like a bit bigger than a fingernail. Okay? But after you sprain your ankle, your entire joint blows up and you get a lot of discomfort and you get a lot of tightness. But then once you start to move it around, you notice that this starts to calm down. And you notice that, okay, I have range here, I don't have it here, okay, this is actually not so bad. And then what you'll find is that if you continue to move it around, you're going to regain a lot of range. So this is sensitivity that's guarding you. This is the overprotective response of the body. And it's very, very, very good. Like, it's a very efficient model of protecting an area after it's been injured so that we don't overload it, injure it more, and cause bigger problems. Like, it's a really good thing. But the thing is that every single time that you lean into the area that's been mechanically damaged, okay, and with the ankle, it's like if you invert your ankle, you bring your toes to the inside. If it's an ATFL sprain on the lateral ankle, you get the same pain over and over again when the actual tissue has been stretched. Now it can reduce, but you do get a very, very similar pain. And as I said, that is your difference in a lot of cases between your mechanical injury or your protective system. And when you start to understand this more, you can use it to your advantage. The same when you're starting to load sensitive tissues, whether that be your back or your knee or your shoulder. You need to touch off it, and then when you start to understand it better, you have to have a structure combined with goals, objectives, clarity, what you're working towards. Okay, today I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk. I'm going to test it out a bit more. So maybe tomorrow or the day after I could have a bit more of a flare-up. You're understanding it in the wider context. It's not just about the pain that you're feeling right now. And then everything that you're doing is moving you in the direction so that your tolerance improves, your conditioning improves, that the pain reduces, that you start to get confidence, you start to get independence in your movement. All of these things will start to improve over time. But you do need a kind of a clear structure of what you're working on. Then the accountability and then the support helps. And that is exactly how you go from having this issue and these obstacles that are consistently in your way to overcoming them and getting back into a place that you are comfortable moving again and getting back to the activities that you love to do. But as I said, it starts with little steps in the right direction. And it honestly really does start with accepting that, okay, I'm not in a place that I want to be. I need to improve. This isn't going to improve if I don't actually start working on it. So if this makes sense to you, if the podcast resonates with you, if you feel like, okay, this is something that I need to get to work on, then we would be happy to have you on board. We have different programs available, from our Back Pain Back to Exercise group program that works extremely well, has a nice community, has the structure, gives you the clarity, the accountability and support along that journey to get you from zero exercise back to the gym. Or if you're already in exercise and you want to increase it because the back is at you all the time, then this is a perfect suit. Or if you have goals that are different to that, if you have a lot of fear, a lot of beliefs that need to be broken, you feel like this takes more of a one-to-one, more support, then we have our one-to-one select program. And when spaces open up on that, we take people in. So we do have a little bit of a waiting list at the moment. If you are interested in it, just send me an email at info@themobilitytutor.com, or you can write to me on Instagram at RobbieCassidy_, and we can look at getting you involved in one of those groups or one of those programs. Because there's no point living your life with all these limitations and pains and everything around it. You can actually make a huge difference by just starting on a structure. But you actually have to start. That's the biggest difference. So that's all I wanted to chat about today, to be honest. I just wanted to show you that leaning into it sometimes and understanding the pain and getting a better idea of what's going on can really help in your recovery, because you stop fearing everything. You stop seeing everything as dangerous, and instead you can start seeing, okay, what is a problem versus what can I work on and what can I fix? Now, if you found the podcast helpful, I would love if you could send it on to a friend. It's honestly the best way for me to promote the podcast there. If you could, I'm trying to get up to 1,000 ratings on Spotify and iTunes right now, and to be honest, I'm way off it at the moment. But if you could, I'd love to go on to Spotify or wherever you're listening to this and hit the 5-star if you found the podcast helped you. It goes a long way in promoting it as well and getting it to different people. And I will be getting more guests on as well soon, so I just want to make sure that when people look at it, that they can see, okay, there is actually a lot of people listening to this and downloading it, and it just helps me to put out, I guess, a better picture of it for them. But otherwise, as I said, if you need help, just contact me at info@themobilitytutor.com or RobbieCassidy_ on Instagram. And that is all from me for this week. I will chat to you all again very soon. Have a good one.